Hi, I'm Paul Verschuren, and today I'm speaking with Meg Jones about collaboration in large multinational organizations. Meg has a background in international studies and economics, having studied in Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Netherlands. She's a senior expert in trade and United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and has held senior roles in economic empowerment at United Nations for over a decade. So what I would like to start with is just to understand a little bit your professional trajectory that brought you to where you are today. So if you understand a little bit the context in which you have been looking and experiencing human collaboration.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a delight to be on your show today. Listen, collaboration has basically been the backbone of my professional career. I started off when I was in high school, very interested in how the Japanese had managed to rebuild themselves from the rubble of World War II into the economic superpower in what was then the 80s. So, and that was really my first dive into collaboration, going to Japan as an exchange student and understanding the Japanese way of thinking from the inside out. And then after that, I worked in the latter years for Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and also with the United Nations for 15 years. And I'm currently now with Fair Trade International in their Australia New Zealand office, which is, of course, also about collaboration. So really, the whole piece has been around looking at how you can actually bring people together to take projects to scale or to replicate. But it really is about the scale aspect.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But then, so maybe you started now as your experiences early on in Japan, and then ending up where you are now in an NGO. But how would you define collaboration? So what is collaboration and what are the underlying features?
Yep. Well, I think, Paul, there's an African proverb that says, alone I can go fast and together we go far. And I really think it's that recognition. Collaboration is bringing a group of people or entities together to achieve something, whether that's a task or a goal. It really is bringing more than one person or entity together to achieve a common task or goal. And I think what that really requires is vision. The people who are going to be part of this collaboration need to recognize a common vision. They need to see what it is that they can contribute to that and what it is they're going to get out of that. And they need to agree on leadership as well. I think this is how, in some ways, it differs from cooperation. I think you can cooperate without necessarily a strong leadership component in place, but collaboration, you really need to have leadership there.
Mm-hmm. But so what you highlight here, there's goals, objectives, there's incentives.
Yeah.
But also leadership. So do you see other underlying features that stand out? Or these would for you be the three pillars, if you want, of human collaboration?
I think human collaboration is around goals, it is around incentives and leadership, but the make or break in the mix, if you like, is trust.
Mm-hmm.
If there's trust between partners, then you'll be able to continue, even when things do become difficult. But without trust, nothing will be achieved, essentially, and the thing will fall apart. I mean, as you know, I worked for the United Nations for 15 years, and I think the United Nations is the platform for collaboration par excellence. I mean, it was established for that. Out of the rubble of World War II, it was really, the purpose was to bring the nations of the world together to ensure that the atrocities that had taken place preceding and during the Second World War never happened again. And so that was when it's the forum where at a governmental level, the governments of the world actually agree to not in any way give up their sovereignty. They retain their sovereign rights, but it is a forum for collaboration for, if you like, the greater good, whether that's human rights. And I worked at the Office of the United Nations Human Rights, Commission for Human Rights, or if it's in trade, I worked in trade for many years. Or as is central to our response to the COVID pandemic, the World Health Organization, governments coming together there to share the results of their scientific research and their experience in innovation in tackling the virus at the national level.
Mm-hmm. But now, if we take United Nations as our example of collaboration, certainly it aspires to be the example of collaboration in some sense.
what would be then the objective, really? So you start with the goal. What is the goal in order for also antagonized countries to just communicate? Or is it also to achieve a common objective in a more constructive sense?
Well, the overarching goal of the United Nations is about peace and security. Really, that's central to the UN. And I think what we've seen with globalization and other factors is that peace and security can be impacted by factors even beyond the general factors for war. I mean, for example, ill health like we're experiencing at the moment, the pandemic that we're experiencing at the moment, or the race towards the conservation of water resources, the ownership of water resources. There are many circumstances in which the United Nations acts as the convening force for discussions around which collaborations can form and prove useful.
But as such, has it achieved that goal, or is it effective in achieving this goal?
I think yes. I mean, in many ways, yes. Of course, I can only speak to my own experience in forming collaborations as an international civil servant, as part of the UN machinery. I can share some experience on that. But before I do that, I think it's worth acknowledging that from the time of the Millennium Development Goals, which were promulgated under Kofi Annan's leadership, to now the Sustainable Development Goals, MDGs ran 2000 to 2015, and then we've got the Sustainable Development Goals now from 2015 to 2030. I mean, this is where the member states of the United Nations have agreed basically the development agenda, and the purpose of that is to focus and concentrate resources around the 17 goals, which include, of course, health and human rights and climate change.
Mm-hmm.
But in the context of, if I can just go back to answer your specific question about where has the UN been successful? One small example. I worked as I headed up the program for women's economic empowerment at the International Trade Center, which is part of the UN in Geneva. It's where the World Trade Organization makes the trade rules, or the member states of the WTO establish the rules that govern international trade. And the International Trade Center is all about putting those rules into practice, working with the private sector. So the UN is public sector largely, and then working with the private sector to help small and medium-sized companies export. And within that context, I was responsible for women's economic empowerment, currently is Sustainable Development Goal number 5. And I think in terms of that, Paul, what we did was we put together a collaboration, because the thing about the UN is that it is vast. It's under-resourced. Whether you're talking about human or financial resources, the UN is under-resourced, and that's why it needs to leverage its its convening power to form collaborations between public sector, academics, NGOs to achieve those goals. And that's what we did with women's economic empowerment when we established what was then called the Global Platform for Action for Sourcing from Women Vendors, which is now called She Trades.
Mm-hmm. But then, so for the United Nations, there are two different collaborative processes that we could analyze. Like on the one hand, it is a body where countries try to collaborate. On the other hand, it's a body formed by humans who internally also have to collaborate to serve, in some sense, the collaboration between nations.
Exactly.
So if we take your pillars of collaboration of goals, incentives, and leadership, how would that translate to these two different processes? Because in some sense you also face, of course, a massive heterogeneity in terms of the players at both these levels.
Yes, you do. And again, that's where I think collaboration differs from cooperation. In cooperation, you get between homogenous entities. And when you talk about collaboration, it really is heavy lifting, because there is a lot more heterogeneity amongst the players there when you're talking about collaboration. So I think you're right. And the UN is probably one of the most diverse institutions on the face of the planet by definition. It's got 104 member states that are coming together to try to agree goals, which is why if there's any outcome such as sustainable development goals, I mean, what could you do on sustainable development? There are thousands of things you could do on that front. So for the member states of the United Nations to come together to narrow that down to just 17 is in and of itself an achievement. Yeah, because also behind that, I think this is the other thing that the UN is very good at. It's good at iteration. It's good at iteration. The iteration is very slow, but it's good at iteration because it has a long institutional memory stemming back to the end of the Second World War. So, for example, learnings are taken on board. So, for example, whereas the Millennium Development Goals, that first set of 8 goals, which was promulgated in 2000, was really the reporting on achievements was done by developing and least developed countries to the United Nations reporting in. What we see in the Sustainable Development Goals, this set of 17 goals, it's actually an agenda that's owned by developing, least developed, and developed countries. It's private sector, and it's private sector. Corporations have also taken up or recognized responsibilities under the Sustainable Development Goals and are reporting on those as well. And I think that's a major step forward. Academia is also playing a role in that as well. Lots of research going around how to better achieve those goals and achieve the outcomes. And of course, NGOs have always been central to the achievement of development goals, and including in this instance.
Mm-hmm. But then you could, of course, so first we have to establish these goals, and indeed the Sustainable Development Goals are a very good example of that.
Yes.
But now you could also then argue, well, maybe that's just the lowest common denominator around which we could actually group all these heterogeneity in objectives, in interests, and so on, which means that the Sustainable Development Goals in the end are so broad and ill-defined that they will give you little traction in the real world. So isn't that the continuous problem, the problem of compromise, because you have a lot of hidden conflicting forces that you have to act against?
You could look at it like that. And yet I would say there's nothing wrong with sharing of experience on the lowest common denominator. Because once you've got a good baseline, then you can keep building on that. But unless countries share in that common denominator, you will never be, there will always be these large gaps in development status. And I think you could use the current pandemic as a case in point there. If you're looking at, if you juxtapose vaccine nationalism with vaccine equity, for example, which is the difference between Australia wanting all Australians to be vaccinated versus making that vaccine available in the Pacific, our nearest neighbours. That kind of juxtaposition, I think that's important to look at. And also in terms when you're fighting something new like COVID, using the WTO as that platform for the sharing of scientific breakthroughs, if you like, for sharing of experience on what works at the national level in the different countries and what could work by definition, or one would hope, in different regions as well, because of course COVID as a virus is going to spread more quickly in a given region, even as it does globally.
Mm-hmm. But now what you also mentioned, and maybe these things go together. You said, look, the United Nations is very good at iterating a process.
Yes.
And that's also how you would build up from the baseline. So yes, to develop the collaboration over time by stretching out the time, in some sense, the participating players are changing continuously because the process runs over a longer period of time than the presence of the individual players. Is that a reaction to overcoming this challenge of the lowest common denominator, you say?
Yes, well, I think it is. I mean, because countries also, even if you look at if we move now to the human rights context, countries have a reporting requirement every 4 years to report on the discharging of their obligations under international treaties at the national level, how they've changed legislation, regulation, administrative instructions to bring themselves into alignment with their international treaty obligations. And that must be done every 4 years, irrespective of changes in government. And I think that's important to remember as well. I mean, that's what countries are held to. It doesn't matter who's in power today, left, right, centre, makes no difference. Mm-hmm. The country has a reporting requirement, and of course, there has to be what's called a progressive. There we go. We're looking for the word progressive realisation of rights. So there has to be progression. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's the operative word there. Mm-hmm. And again, when countries go to report on the realisation of human rights, obligations at the national level, the committees under the treaties they make observations and they share how other countries have actually overcome the obstacles that country may identify as being an impediment to their realisation of rights. So I think it's a really good forum for as countries feel the pressure, they report, they draw down new information on how they can improve, and then they apply that over the next 3-4 years and they report again. So there is that progressive, iterative movement through the achievement of goals, whether it's sustainable development goals or human rights goals there as well. And what the UN also does to further accelerate the realization of those goals is it hosts regional meetings. And this is useful from the perspective of, because you talked about heterogeneity before, any cultural, linguistic differences as well, because sometimes there is that feeling that's expressed that, you can't compare region A with region B. We're so different in terms of religion or language or many other factors. And so the UN is, again, the convening power in the different regions for regional meetings as well, to share knowledge.
Right. But now, so how did that then translate to the actual day-to-day work you were doing when you were working on these issues of women empowerment? So how did it now translate? Right. So
I think
internal working and how you reach out.
Yeah. Well, I think you raised a very good point before about the people, because I tell you one thing, collaboration really only works with the right mix of people. There can be this view that if you line up institution A, B, C, D, this natural progression will lead you to outcomes E and F or something like that. But I'm telling you from long experience and working across a range of collaborations, it's the people at the table that will make that collaboration work or not. So it's not just about the organizations or institutions, it's about the people who are sent, if you like, or opt in to represent those organizations. And the most successful collaborations I've worked in have been the people will get out of bed at 3 a.m. and crawl across broken glass because this has to be done now. That's the secret to collaboration. And that gets back down to what I was talking about before about trust. Good leadership and trust. Trust that the vision that we've set for ourselves or the task before us can be achieved, no matter how ominous it may appear. And trust in each other that collectively, once again, to that point about alone I can go fast, but together we go far. But collectively we can actually achieve solid runs on the board. And that is where the collaboration is if you've got 5 people, it's no longer a collaboration between 5 people. It really is 5 organizations or 5 institutions, say 5 organizations. And when you've got 5 organizations at the table, then you get that longevity, that temporal aspect, the longevity aspect as well, which I think is really important. It goes beyond the people. I think good collaboration starts with the people, the right people, the right entities, and then you can get those results over time. With that, it's
what are then the traits of the perfect collaborator? You talk about people. What are the?
I think it comes down
also to give an example of how it worked around this notion of the people involved.
Sure. I think it comes down to you have to correctly identify what you're solving for. What is the problem? Because if you get a good problem definition, then you can actually come up with a solution. So in terms of economic empowerment of women, there's 100 ways you could approach that. Working for the United Nations Free Trade Institute, we had to achieve that through trade, right? So then one of the problems we realized was actually ascertaining where do women business owners, in which sectors are they concentrated? Now, sitting at my desk in Geneva, how am I going to find out that? Because there was no research on the topic, or very little research. That they're in textiles and clothing, kind of, but what else are they in? It's a bit anecdotal, So then we worked. So then you've got to figure out which organisations to work with. So we chose to reach out to the International Federation of Business and Professional Women because it was the largest organisation of business women on the business and professional women on the planet. They're active in over 90 countries, 30,000 members. And the first step, so they were the first people I reached out to, was the International Federation of Business and Professional Women, and with an agreement to survey their members, because they had so many members, to find out what those sectors were. Also at that time, collaborating very closely with a group called We Connect, because they're all about connecting women business owners with corporations, and they had the corporate networks. We Connect is a membership-based organisation of corporations that want to increase sourcing goods and services from companies owned by women. So we had the private sector there. As the UN, we knew the supply side. We have deep connections into women business owners in developing and least developed countries. So we had the supply side sorted out. We needed guidance on the sectors, which we got through the feedback from the survey from the International Federation of Business and Professional Women, and then working with We Connect on the demand side with the corporations to bring that together. So we had our first meeting, and it was only 27 people, but again, they were representatives of about 14 different organisations to determine how we'd move forward. And we decided to focus on procurement, came up with some ideas around that, started running annual meetings. And to date, there's been $80 million of worth of sales from goods and services from companies owned by women in developing and least developed countries. That's pretty good, Paul. It's $8 million that otherwise wouldn't have gone into the pockets of women in the developing world.
Right. No, I know. I understand. But you said earlier that what really matters to make a successful collaboration is the people around that table, right?
Yes,
so
that's right.
What was special about the people around that table to then lead to this success? What did they bring to that table to make that happen? Was it indeed trust, for instance? Was that the main thing? Or was it also a sense of taking initiative, accepting risk? I don't know. I'm guessing.
Well, I don't know. I'm guessing is a really good place to start, because if you're looking to bring people around the table to collaborate on something, a good place to start is by recognizing we have a problem and saying, I don't know, I'm guessing that this could be a way forward, but I really need the input of the people around this table to figure out what is a way, what is the best chances of working going forward. I think in terms of the qualities in the people, humility goes a long way. I think humility, experience, and then the trust is built over time. But firstly, it has to be trust in the vision to get people together to be part of identifying, okay, the problem, but what are the solutions to the problem? What are the options we have before us? And then out of that comes almost like the rules and regulations around how you make decisions as well, because that's an important part in a collaboration as well. There has to be a way to make decisions. And under a collaboration, that has to happen. I wouldn't necessarily say quickly, but it has to happen decisively so you can keep moving forward. Mm-hmm. And therefore there has to be trust in the leadership. So, right. And that's, I think, where the UN is also valuable, because there is trust in the leadership there.
But now, could you also give an example where this just didn't work out? Mm-hmm. Because these features were absent.
Yeah. I think they just naturally fall apart, Paul. I've been involved in some non-starters where, where there's an indication that we must do something. We always must do something, but then certain parties just don't come to the table. They just don't come to the meetings, and unless people turn up, then you're just not going to be able to achieve.
Well, you starve the process through your absence.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you starve the process through absence, which is a tactic. It's a tactic used in also by some players in different international because there's the substance and there's the process.
Yes, but now in the example you gave us, we speak about women empowerment.
Yes,
and that's the success of that story is also how you summarized it, is to bring more money to the pockets of women.
Absolutely.
But do you also see that as, let's say, a struggle against an other form of let's say power and control that is maybe more dominated by males? And do you see that converge or do you see that diverge? So because that would suggest that there are two realms of collaboration, possibly, that will never meet. And that we have to indeed support one realm more because the other one is very dominant. The top-down power-based one. So how do you look at that?
Well, I did a lot of work with governments, and I think, firstly, in many instances, you need to get the different ministries to agree to collaborate with you to achieve the common goal. And that might sound like that should be automatic, but it isn't. Typically, the UN deals with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's UN level. My interlocutors with the Ministry of Trade. I did a lot of work in agriculture. So then there's the Ministry of Agriculture. And somewhere in there's usually a Ministry of Women's Affairs. So it's 4 different ministries with 4 different briefs. And rarely do those 4 different ministers come into the same room around a topic like economic empowerment. And then you need to convince them as to why that's important. So if I go back to the example, one of the areas that came out of the survey in which women are concentrated was coffee. Yeah. Okay, fine. So then you have to look for an organisation, bring them in. So we worked for the International Women's Coffee Alliance. Fine. Then I did some work in Uganda, Burundi, East Africa. And a lot of that was with, firstly, the doorway was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Women's Affairs, bringing the Ministry of Trade, talking to these ministers about how important it was for them to support this process of women's economic empowerment in their country, for them to recognise the role of women in the coffee value chain, that women do most of the work and they're down at the very poorly paid end of that. And to ask ministers questions. I won't name the country, but one of the countries in East Africa decided to issue export certificates, export licenses, very lucrative. They're actual license to export coffee. They issued 10 of them and they all went to men. So I asked the Minister of Trade, was that intentional? And he said, but we made that information available through the Chamber of Commerce. And then how many women are part of the Chambers of Commerce? And if you're growing coffee in remote and by definition high altitude areas, typically miles from capital, how are you going to even know about that? Because you're not plugged into that kind of a network. So it was really talking about, if you want to actually achieve outcomes across the value chain, they're equitable, really looking at the role of men and women there and ensuring that the information goes out to women. And so to your question on collaboration, how do you do that? Again, I think our role was bringing around the table the people who played key roles in coffee and getting them to recognise themselves how important it was to have the women at the table. Mm-hmm. When we had these meetings, for example, invariably the women would say, we work so hard on improving on good agricultural practices to improve the quality and quantity of coffee. We get the stuff ready, we grow the stuff, it goes into bags, and then the time it goes to market is typically a time when it rains heavily and the roads are washed out, And so having the Ministry of Public Works at the table too, to also recognise their role in women's economic empowerment through the export of coffee, to show that this is a hugely collaborative effort that hugely needs the support of the government for that to happen in a very practical sense. You raised questions about men and women power dynamics. You see these play out in these meetings. These women are not used to speaking to men in power. So part of our role was engendering confidence in the women to be able to speak up, to help them articulate what their concerns were. But honestly, Paul, and this is the thing about the United Nations. Once you've built those relationships, you've built the confidence, you've built the trust, and you've actually shone light into a dark area, like, for example, how important the Ministry of Public Works is to women's economic empowerment, rebuilding the feeder roads, back up the hill so the coffee can come down. Then people realise the value of having them at the table to be able to share that information. They also realised the value on some of the research that we did on the importance of women's economic empowerment in terms of breaking into generational poverty as well, women's spending on the health, the education of children, very important areas. So it's a big picture. And I think that's the thing about collaboration. Once you get those parties together, once they start to listen, once they build relationships in themselves, this is the role of the UN to bring those people together. And then when they're there, this is when they stick as glue, because export is so important in these countries. It's top foreign exchange earner. And clearly the education and health of children is very important as well. So these collaborations tend to stick, play out for the best over time.
Mm-hmm. So this is very clear, right? And it also seems like almost that you have like a recipe to make at least to make progress in this.
Yes.
To make like start in some sense, start simple, bring all the stakeholders together, have to communicate and so on. But in some sense, after 15 years of doing that, you stepped out of it. Even though these are hugely important challenges for humanity, where you were really playing a very relevant role. So did you step out because you thought, okay, it's all solved now and someone else can do it because the recipe is clear? Or did you also step out because actually it's also a very challenging and draining activity that you only can sustain for a certain amount of time? So why did you step out of it?
First, when I started in the year 2000 on what was then what I call gender and trade, there was so little known about that. It was just a gut feeling that I had that this was so important, and there was so little research, and there was and nothing being done at the World Trade Organization at all at that time. And I really felt the need to fight in this very important area. I knew it was important. It's just that we hadn't devised things yet. Like one of the first projects I worked on with the ITC was to come up with a methodology for a gender sensitive value chain analysis, not just a value chain looking at coffee, but where are women along the value chain. So, I spent 15 years working with governments and people to put these tools together to build the structure that is now She Trades, that it continues today. There's a meeting in Dubai in October, another buyers sellers meeting in October, and it's it's a few years along the track now. So these things are in place. I get very passionate about building things, about collaborations to tackle new problems. When the structures are in place, I'm happy and super happy to pass these things over and have them keep working. I'm very happy to build collaborations. I think that's perhaps it is a skill that I have. It's playing out now in Australia. I work now in COVID in Australia as well. In addition to my work with Fair Trade, I work as a community engagement worker on COVID, and I work in the vaccination clinics here. And Paul, the reason I do that is because our government has worked very hard with the medical fraternity here and the scientific community to do what they can to tackle the virus. But Paul, my whole life has been about collaboration that brings in the people. So I work as a community engagement worker in public housing. I work on the trust element. I work with the people. I mean, we have very strict rules here about who can and cannot get vaccinated. You can only get vaccinated in Australia if you're 40 years and above. But as a community engagement worker, my role, for example, was to speak. When it's cleaning, the guy who is the supervisor for the cleaning crews that go into our public housing to do the deep cleaning and to sterilize all the touch points. He asked me, could his staff be vaccinated? Most of them are under 40 and mostly under 30. The technical answer is no, but it's my role there to go back and speak to the decision makers and make the case as to why it's really important for those that are cleaning public housing towerage to actually be vaccinated. Otherwise, they're going to be vectors for disaster. So this is the thing again. It's great to have a collaboration. The thing about collaboration too, I think there always needs to be room for improvement as well. And so it can't be cliquey. Your collaboration can't be cliquey. There has to be room in there, and there always has to be room to recognize the human factor. So every collaboration I've worked on, it's always been around the people. Like when we looked at coffee, it wasn't coffee as a commodity per se. There's a lot of money going into good agricultural practices and this and that. But really looking at the people, what it is that the most vulnerable, most disadvantaged groups in that value chain, what it is they lack. And again, to go back to collaboration, one of the pieces we built into that, because ITC doesn't do finance, we brokered the first ever sale of $1 million worth of coffee from an association of women coffee growers in Burundi that we helped set up to plug them into banking and finance options as well, because there aren't many banks in remote rural areas where coffee is grown, and women typically don't have bank accounts in many of those places. And so you can talk about economic empowerment, but then you can expose people to vulnerability, to attack, actually, quite literally, if you're giving them, if they then have money and they don't have a place to store it.
But now you put your finger on what you do now, and that you, as focusing on the community, you see yourself as building trust, trying to build trust.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But trust in what? What do you want people to trust?
So what I think this is the thing about collaboration. Each member of a collaboration, when you're looking at something, they either opt in or they opt out. And opting in requires sharing in a common vision. So you can share in the common vision, but then you have to also share in, believe in the leadership, the group that's leading that, the group or the person, typically a group, the entity that's leading that. Yeah. So you need to trust in the vision as it's been articulated, and typically one would hope you've had some role in discussing that with the other members of the collaboration, and the leadership. Yeah. So I think it's that trust in the vision and trust in the leadership.
Mm-hmm. But there's sort of an ethical issue in that as well, no? Because in some sense, you are also a mediator between a larger system, which is over, in the end, your government, who imposes certain measures in response to this emergency, which you might not necessarily always agree with, right? Or that you might find limiting. But on the other hand, you also know people do have to support this. There has to be some compromise in order for us all to get through this with minimal damage. So where does the ethics then come in that decision making? I see the bidirectionality, right? You speak to the people, to the community, but you also speak with representatives of the system when that system is actually not working in a way that you think is proper. But where would you draw that line?
Well, I mean, I suppose that's again the typical role that I've played in most of these things. It's been arguing the case for the exceptions to the rules, and each case is different. So yes, I mean, in terms of our government says you can only be vaccinated 40 and above, unless there are certain circumstances like health issues, this kind of thing. But to be that voice for the cleaners, because I understand the system. So this is the thing, where there is a collaboration as there is around COVID, there needs to be entry points for that. And so, if you like, that is the role that I play. In terms of ethics, then it comes down to, because I'm part of the COVID vaccination world, if you like, decision-making world, then it comes down to knowing the players and how far they will go. And then it's a call on your own ethics, I suspect, as to how hard and when you want to push.
Mm-hmm. Because there will be aspects also of Australian politics and governance that you might not agree with.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you have to communicate to community members, well, let's trust the system. Let's assume that they mean well. Let's assume they have also our best interest at heart.
And then you're back to science, though, Paul. Then you're back to science, because it's like in AstraZeneca, with the AstraZeneca vaccine, for example, it can cause blood clots in very rare cases, and it isn't around typical clotting modalities like deep vein thrombosis and illnesses like that. It has to do with platelets in the blood, which is very different to deep vein thrombosis. So it's taking the science and talking to the community. It's trusting the government's trusting in the science and taking that to the community and saying, listen, if you don't, AstraZeneca presents some risks, but if you get COVID, you're 10 times more likely to get blood clots. That kind of relaying of information back into the community as well.
Okay. So, but that means you also build on, let's say, a ground truth that has to be the scientific evidence in some way that you communicate, right, to community members. So, but then, of course, you have this onslaught right now of disinformation in that domain. So then how do you deal with this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, and this is what I've pitched this to our management as well. Then you need to bring in the community leaders from a range of diverse backgrounds. There needs to be engagement, even with those who hold what one might consider to be the views which are furthest from your own. It is to actually engage, because if you don't engage, you then ostracize, and that can lead to its own set of problems. And typically, I found over the years that people, they just want to be heard. And sometimes once they've been heard, that's all they really needed. It's a strange kind of like set of circumstances, but it does seem to be that people need to be heard no matter what their views are. And once they've been heard, the mere telling of whatever it is their truth is seems to, in some ways, diffuse them. That doesn't mean you have to take it. You don't have to integrate that into your own template for where to from here. in terms of what it is you're going to deliver, but you will need to build out a bubble over here that talks about how to also engage that group of people as well in the discussion as you move forward, even if it's in the opposite direction to what they want.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, but in some sense, what you seem to express is to also respect, if you want, the agency of every individual in that process. But to
Yes.
be heard also means I am acknowledged and I'm affirmed as a human being with my opinion. So does it really come down to something relatively straightforward like that we don't listen enough to each other?
No, it does. I think the problem with collaboration is comes with the digital age in many ways, because whereas before you could get people in a room, you know yourself, Paul, because you've been to many conferences. You go to conferences because you're asked to speak. But the real joy of going to conferences is the discussions on the margins. You know. Mm-hmm. Because that's where the frontiers are. The frontiers are discussed on the margins because these are ideas which haven't yet fully formed. You know, nobody's actually giving a paper on this yet because it's coming together and you can feel it coming together, but it hasn't quite stuck yet. So I think those in-person meetings are so rich in what you learn, obviously in the main plenaries and in the workshops and whatnot. But certainly in the discussions on the margins, when you really get the electricity of thought, you know, and I really miss that. Because at the moment with the COVID lockdown, because unfortunately, the flip side of that, and it's been brought out obviously with the antics of Cambridge and Analytica and the persuadables. Mm-hmm. I think the antithesis of that electricity of thought and its exploration of frontier knowledge and what could crystallize is the phenomena of the persuadables being persuaded by a campaign. Launched out of somewhere over social media. Mm-hmm. And then you get an ever expanding understanding of something which is just fundamentally false. And depending on your education system, you've either been trained or not in analytical thinking or critical thinking. And if you haven't, and if you surround yourself with like-minded people, whether that's virtually or literally or physically, it's more virtually than not, then where are the counterpoints? You know, where are the people to present those other? Yeah, and I think
so okay. Now we're still at the tail end, hopefully, of this COVID crisis. You also engaged then with the new NGO.
Yes.
What are the lessons? So do you have a rule book for yourself now? You say, okay, look, given my experience, we did the UN, now we did COVID. We've seen also how things don't work. So now I have a new rule book, and there are certain things I should change in how I approach building collaboration. Do you have such a rule book right now, or new rules in the rule book?
I think I just have experience in the rule book, Paul. One of them is around because I work for the United Nations, so that by definition is a whole range of difference. You want to talk about difference? It's all there. You know, it's by nationality, by religion, by language, by anything. You know, coming back to Australia now, it's now I'm I'm an Australian in Australia. This is a different thing. Yet what I see is that same thing here, that people tend towards people who look like themselves or speak like themselves. But there's still this grouping thing. So I think that to form collaborations that are really going to affect change over time, those bonds, these seeming bonds, if you like, need to be broken, and people need to be brought in, or at least offered the opportunity to participate in collaborations to achieve a common objective. Yeah, you can't have one group of people calling the shots. You know, not in this country. We're very, very diverse. You know, you really need to have all sorts of different represented in our decision-making processes in this country, and that's what I'm trying to do today in my role as well.
Right. So, but that also then talks about this balance between running fast on your own or running further in collaboration. And there might be collisions sometimes, right? So maybe you can see very clearly how things might go off the rails, but then, of course, you could run fast on your own to try to mitigate that. But on the other hand, they say, look, but we have to fuel this collaborative process to maybe make these mistakes, but come out better at the end. So how do you balance that?
Well, I think each member of the collaboration has their own terms of reference, if you like, and that to me is what a collaboration is. I mean, when in that first example that I gave about the International Trade Centre, we were the platform, but we had the International Women's Coffee Alliance working on coffee. We had WeConnect working with the large corporations. These kinds of things, and I think this is the thing. It's not my role to tell the different entities how to do their job. And I think this is with the age benefit, I don't know, of Asian experience potentially. It's not so much a slowing down, it's an ability to re-articulate what it will remind people of our common objective, why it's important and what it is, and to celebrate the wins,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the other thing about a collaboration. You have to celebrate the wins, and that has to be interpreted in the language of the different entities. Like for coffee, for IWCA, it was really important that that contract for $1 million worth of coffee out of Burundi went reverberated through their membership, that they all got to hear that. And when the corporate sport were able to secure those contracts too, that was celebrated in their community as well. So I think it's about celebrating collectively, but also as individual entities as well, and further spreading.
Right.
Mm.
But now, in some sense, there's a trade-off that in this balancing of running fast on your own or in a small group or getting further. But the issues, of course, some of the crises we face, including COVID, these are really emergencies. And also, if we look at the climate crisis we're facing right now globally, these are emergencies where we might not have that much time. So does that mean that at some point we have to say, okay, sorry, collaboration is important, but we just don't have the time to make it happen, so we have to go top down and impose? Is that something that you see in the future, or do you think that we have enough time to actually, in a collaborative fashion, address these fundamental challenges?
Well, I mean, there are going to be different groups acting on climate change. It's a matter of how they all come together, whether it's the COP or some other entity, where decisions can be made. But decisions must be made, and that's what I was saying before about one of the features of collaboration being leadership, and people's trust in that leadership, that a decision has to be made and that it is followed through on. And there have been times when, as a leader, I have had different people, members of the collaboration, come up with an emergency that needs to be solved right now, and I have made decisions and called the shots. And there have been different feedback on that it was not that they were not consulted, or this or that, this kind of thing. But then again, I think this is one of the qualities of leadership. Leaders should be people who can lead. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but that's what I'm saying. I think leaders should be able to lead. We do need to collaborate. We need to consult. I think that's hugely important. And I think also one of the hallmarks of good leaders to ensure that the right people in the room, or that all of the people who need to be in the room are in the room. And then you can further break them down into working groups on A, B, C, D. There's too many people, and just break them into different working groups and give them their to do, and let them self-identify which part of collaboration they want to pick up and work on. Great. And then just manage that, coordinate that. But yeah, I think actually calling it, like making a call when you have to, is extremely important. And I think that's what we're facing with climate change also, Paul.
Right.
Really, I think even, from Germany to Belgium recently, the rains and the floods, to other countries which have been experiencing the brunt of this. I mean, I do live very close to the Pacific now. Countries are going underwater.
But now, in your experience, who would stand out as leaders who did it right, and what made them stand out? What are examples?
The New Zealand Prime Minister. Look at that woman. My God.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a woman and a half, that one. When that Australian guy from shot the massacred people worshipping in the mosque, and she donned a hijab and spoke of the sorrow, and she refused to say his name. Wow. That kind of leadership. She was the first person, I think, to, if I recall correctly, to shut down a city, let alone a country, in response to COVID. She called that very early, and she put people, because it's when small businesses close, they bleed. It's and the ramifications are vast. I mean, I lead the development of the cut flower category at Fairtrade. We're setting up Fairtrade certified cut roses into Australia now. It's a new category here on top of coffee, tea, chocolate, and all the rest of it that Fairtrade does. And our florists are closed. We're in lockdown. It's our 5th lockdown in Victoria. The florists are closed. So that causes enormous hardship to the florists in Victoria. But also, for example, at the farm level, we import roses from East Africa. I've got a project funded by the Enhanced Integrated Framework, which is part of the WTO, in Ethiopia. You know where Ethiopia is right now? It's in dire straits, Tigray province and so on. So we locked down in Melbourne, and you have the echoes in East Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But so anyway, back to leadership, Jacinda Ardern.
Okay.
Prime Minister.
So, Jacinda Ardern is number one on the list. Do you have other examples? Or is she so exemplary and far above the rest?
No, I think Amma in India, the hugging saint. Yeah. Why do I think that she's, of the many reasons I think she's amazing. She has that amazing university down in Kerala there, and she has a hospital. She's built a hospital and a university, and she integrated the neuroscience part of the university into the hospital. It's actually not on the university grounds at all. It's in the hospital, because what she wanted to see, as you know, Paul, she wanted to see the academics working very closely with the problems and solving real problems. And I think that's and with astonishing outcomes. They have a little probe that they can test whether or not the lips have been they have the skin cancers on the lips from chewing the bun and whatnot. And so I think that's I think the way she conceptualizes not only problems but solving problems, and her amazing ability to mobilize millions in that regard is astonishing as well. So, Paul, I think that speaks to something else. I mean, we've been largely talking about governmental responses, and we've completely ignored the power of religion to convene as well. And clearly, there's a lot in that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but in some sense, globally, and certainly in the Western world, religion is losing ground, right? And then the question is, what are the alternative frameworks that we can then deploy to again restabilize large-scale collaboration?
Mm-hmm. You think that, and yet here in Australia, it is Anglicare, for example, the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, which have provided strong responses, which are big players in aged care here, and collaborating with the government about the situations of management of COVID in care facilities here. The church, at least in Australia, retains quite a lot of its, if you like, influence. I was going to say power, but I think it's more influence these days. And is still very active in areas such as homelessness and so on. It's on the decline, but I think it's a function of individualism in many ways. You've got people coming up with their own designer religions. It's people that are picking and choosing spirituality over religion, whatever that may mean to them. But I don't think that that's going to last long, to tell you the truth. I think whether it's Confucianism, Islam, Christianity, or any one of a number of faiths with long history, I think that there will be a renaissance of traditional religions in the not too distant future, as people get frustrated with the outcomes of selecting or picking and choosing and what they think is going to work for them.
Mm-hmm. Right. So now to go to the conclusions or the finish line in that sense, do you believe humans will ever be able to really collaborate in a sustainable way on a global scale? Is it even possible?
We collaborate. I think the sustainability is a concept which is now taking root in the minds of just about everybody around the planet. When we look at microplastics in fish and so on and so forth, the awareness is growing there, and with as we live through the impact of the changing weather patterns and so on, I think we're starting to realise that sustainability needs to be integrated into probably all aspects of decision making, particularly decision making done by groups who are collaborating to achieve an outcome. I think whatever the outcome was that we were looking for before the goal, whatever goal the collaborations were coming together just to achieve before, in terms of the process of realizing that goal, there's going to need to be a stronger understanding of an integration of sustainability there. I think it's really important, the work that you're doing, Convergent Science Network, because I think that in particular, as you know, there's very little work that's been actually done on the science, such as there may be one, of collaboration. And I think it's really timely, Paul, that you're looking at this. What is it that what are the basic pillars of collaboration? Because I think if sustainability has not yet been integrated into collaborations, then it needs to be a factor which is urgently considered. Whether that's looking at how to dispose of the millions and billions of masks that are being discarded. Different ways of dealing with biohazard waste. In Australia, it costs $400 to dispose of a 35-litre garbage bag of biohazard waste, which is basically what we use. It's that when we change masks and the gloves and so on, that's $400 a go. That's really expensive. That kind of thing. So I think, the science is really important. What you're looking at now is really important. And if you can weave in sustainability, I think that would be a big win for the planet.
But do you believe humans will be able to do it, to collaborate on a large?
We do, Paul. I don't know how much political science you've done, but if you go way back to social contract theory, that's what we do. We give up some of our rights to be governed by a sovereign, and it's always been about property, the protection of property, whether it's your physical property or you yourself as property in terms of enslavement. I mean, this is basic social contract theory. We've always collaborated with each other to defend against the other as well. Against the attacker, That one's political science 101, and I think that's a really big part of collaboration as well. I mean, you need to watch something like Mars Attacks or something, one of those movies, where there's some existential threat coming from afar, and then all of a sudden we're pushed to collaborate. And actually, you don't have to watch Mars Attacks; you can just use COVID as a case in point. I think, and again, and I believe in the United Nations as the platform for collaboration, because no matter what it is, whether it's just a threat to peace and security or whether it's a threat to health, the UN, we have been successful and humanity has been successful.
But that's interesting, right? Because you say we can do it as long as we're under threat.
Yes.
As long as there's a threat, we can do it. But then, but if you could change one thing in humans to make them more effective in collaborating, what is the one thing you would change?
Listen is the first thing that comes to mind. Have people be a little bit more patient and listen. No, I'd say compassion. If I could turn up the volume on anything, it would be compassion. Because I think if people were more compassionate, by definition, they would listen more. But if people were more compassionate, if I looked at you, Paul, and if I didn't see a Caucasian male, if I weren't blocked by what I see, do you know what I mean? Or if I weren't reacting to either positively or negatively against what I see. If I looked at you as somebody who might catch COVID, Paul, you know what I mean? If I looked at you and didn't see white Caucasian male, if I saw, there's someone, an entity that could catch COVID. And if everybody in front of me I saw as somebody who could catch COVID, I think that would amp up the compassion, So I think compassion can be something which can overcome the visual, oral in terms of linguistic and different accents and so on, or reactions against different, if you're wearing a cross or a hijab or something. I think compassion, if you're looking at a collaboration, if you're looking to achieve a goal, if humans could be more compassionate, I think we would collaborate more easily. We could perhaps also have compassion for our planet and work more effectively on sustainable outcomes as well.
Meg Jones, thank you very much for this conversation.
Oh, for sure. Thank you very much.
Hi, you listened to one of our podcasts in the series on collaboration, produced by the Instrument Forum and the Convergent Science Network. You can find more episodes on our website.